right, welcome to the presentation on chapters 9 and 10 from your oral comm textbook. We're going to talk about organizing the body of your speech, and then we are going to talk a little bit about your introduction and your conclusion. When we are talking about organizing the speech overall, you need to have a specific direction in which you are heading. A good way to do that is to formulate a question that you are going to ultimately answer by the end of your speech. For the relevant person speech that we've recently completed, that question might have looked something like, why is this person relevant? Why is Sir Robert Peel relevant? For the demonstration speech, which you will be working on next, this question might look like, how do I teach my audience to change a tire? How do I teach my audience to prepare a particular snack? How will I demonstrate the process of preparing for a test or studying for an exam? When you're working on the body of your speech, you should be dividing your speech into key ideas. And as you are organizing these ideas, you should have a plan in terms of what logical pattern you are going to use. There are several different patterns that you can follow, one of which is a topical pattern. And then we did use this for the relevant person speech. You thought to yourself, okay, you did some research about your person. What are 3 specific points that I want to make about this person? And they become your 3 major points. And then you give details to support each one of those. As we move into the demonstration speech, most of you will probably use more of a chronological pattern, which is where you're doing things in a particular time sequence, because when you are teaching someone how to do something, there's generally certain things they have to do first, second, third, and fourth. A couple more patterns you can use would include spatial patterns if you are trying to help someone understand geography, or if you're helping them maybe try to understand some sort of an architectural structure. You could have a cause and effect type of pattern. You can do pros and cons. So if you're doing a speech to inform, remember that you have to give both sides of the argument without actually taking a side. You could do something a little more creative, like using a mnemonic, which would be alliteration, a rhyme, initials that spell out a word, like an acronym, and then each of the letters represents a word. This certainly does require a little more creativity. However, audiences do remember it. The last 2 I have here are problem and solution, and also need plan, which are somewhat similar. Problem solution, you explain the problem and then you propose a solution. In a need plan, you talk about the problem, you talk about the solution, and then you actually lay out what the plan is. What are the various steps of the plan, and how is that going to be implemented? For developing each of your key ideas, you should try to use the 4S strategy. And when we talk about the 4S strategy, these are terms that you've heard me use already. So the very first one is signpost. And this is where you're using transitions and effective cues to help move your audience from one major point to the next. You're also going to use transitions within your details in order to help them understand how those details relate back to your major point. The next one here is stating each major idea specifically. So if you think about the outline that you are doing for your demonstration speech, Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3 should be introduction, body, and conclusion. Within each of those, you have major points. You have capital A, B, C, D. Those capital A, B, C, D points, those are your major ideas. And in those major ideas, even on the outline that you're creating for me, I want you to actually include the transition as part of that outline, include the signpost, as well as the sentence that clearly outlines what you're now going to talk to the audience about. Under your capital A's and B's, you're going to have 1, 2, 3s, and 4s, and those are going to be your support, the evidence, the examples, the definitions, the statistics that you'll be using to, again, illustrate or help your audience understand what you're talking about. The final S is summarize, not just summarizing at the very end when you are sort of echoing your thesis statement, but actually creating mini summaries or mini wrap-ups as you go through the process. So, for example, if you are doing a how-to speech and you are talking about how to brush your teeth, And so the first thing you're going to say is, okay, the first thing we have to do is make sure that we assemble all of our supplies. That's going to be your major idea. Then your support is going to be the actual supplies that need to be assembled. Then you can kind of summarize, okay, now that we have gotten together all of the supplies we needed, now what we need to do is actually learn how to apply it. And there's your transition, there's your mini summary, and now we're moving on to the next major point. Remember, in speech giving, tell your audience what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them. In terms of connecting ideas, we use transitions. So we've talked about signposts, and that really highlights more the major ideas. But when we talk about the details and the evidence, you also want to use transitions for those things. There are 4 different kinds of transitions that I'm going to talk about: complementary, causal, contrasting, and chronological. And there is a complete list of transitions in Blackboard in the demonstration speech folder, and I would certainly recommend and encourage you to use that transition list to move beyond the more common and somewhat overused transitions. Okay, so try to shake it up a little bit and use things that still sound like something you would say, but might be a little bit more elevated in terms of giving your speech. All right, so the 4 different kinds. The first one, complementary. This adds one idea to another. So just a couple of examples: and, in addition, next, similarly. You have causal transitions, which again show how one thing actually causes or results in another thing. So as a result, consequently, therefore. You can use contrasting transitions. This shows how that the relationship between 2 things is how they differ. So however, in contrast, nevertheless. And then finally, the chronological transitions. And again, remember that this list is not complete. This is just a sampling of different transitions that you could use. And the chronological transitions are going to be extra helpful to you when you are giving your demonstration speech. So here we have words like after, before, next, finally, in the meantime. Remember that the more clearly you organize your information, the easier it's going to be for your audience to follow what you are saying and to stay with you as you are giving them information. Use your outline to organize your ideas. And again, I've got samples posted in Blackboard for you. We've done a couple of sample ones on the board in class. Use that 4S strategy that we just went over. Make sure you have your signposts. Make sure that you are stating things clearly. Make sure that you are doing little mini summaries. And connect your main points with transitions. In the book, don't forget that in the back there are several different examples of speeches, and this is a really good place for you to look. And as you read the speeches, specifically looking for how did these authors transition into their main ideas? How did they state the main ideas? All right, let's talk about introduction and conclusion. All right, so the functions of your speech introduction. You should command your audience's attention. That's your hook or your attention getter. You need to introduce your topic. You need to establish why the topic is important to your audience. This is that benefit statement that we were talking about. You need to establish your credibility for speaking on the topic. What qualifies you to actually be up there in front of the group giving us the information? And then finally, the previewing your key ideas. This is going to be your thesis statement. Remember, on your outline, Roman numeral 1 is going to be introduction. But A, B, C, D, under that, I want you to actually label them: attention getter, credibility, benefits, and thesis. So I know that you're thinking about those 4 components and you have all 4 of those planned out and integrated into your demonstration speech. A couple of ideas for actually getting your audience hooked or having that attention getter is to start out with a rhetorical question. A question that you ask them that you don't expect them to answer, but one that gets them thinking. Another type of question you can use is a direct question. This is where you actually want the audience to respond to you in some way, but make sure that you give them directions on how you want them to respond. So for example, by show of hands, how many of you have seen whatever movie? Or nod your head if you understand what I'm saying. Or shout out the first thing that comes into your mind when I say, and then give them the information. Generally, if you give them directions on how to respond, you will have a larger number of people willing to respond. Let's see, another thing you could do in terms of grabbing their attention right from the beginning is to arouse their curiosity. So for example, if you bring something in a box, or you bring something in that's covered with a towel or a blanket, people are going to wonder, what the heck is in that box? What the heck is under that blanket? And they're going to pay more attention until their curiosity gets satisfied. Stimulating their imagination, this is where you actually get them thinking about something. So, imagine a situation where you are in an airplane and we hear that there might be a bomb on the airplane. What would you do? Okay, so get them thinking about something. Promise them something beneficial. Let them know that by the end of their speech, they're going to benefit in some way. So if you do this as your hook, if you do this as your attention getter, you can actually take your attention getter and your benefit statement and combine them into one. And that is totally fine. Another thing you can do is amuse them. You tell a joke, you do something humorous, you be a little bit silly. Energize them, meaning kind of get them pumped up. You might get them standing up, you might get them stretching, you might have them make noises with their mouth, whatever, to actually get them physically involved somehow. And then certainly if you compliment or acknowledge things that you admire about your audience, people love to be complimented. Just make sure whatever audience attention getting strategy you decide to use, it's appropriate and makes sense for the speech that you are giving. Right, your preview statement. The preview statement is the thesis statement. This is where you tell them what you're going to talk about and you kind of break that down into some major steps for them. This should really be the foreshadowing of the major points in your outline. So whatever your capital A, B, C, and D are under the body of your speech, those things should be reflected in your thesis statement at the end of your introduction. All right, now let's jump to the end. In your conclusion, which is on your outline going to be Roman numeral number 3, A is going to be a restatement of your thesis. Just make sure that you don't quote your thesis. You want to actually paraphrase yourself when you give your thesis again. Activate the audience response. This really is going to be more appropriate for a persuasive speech as opposed to a demonstration speech. However, you might be able to incorporate it in. But think about how can you now sort of give your audience a challenge or a charge for how they can use this information that you've just given them outside of the classroom. And then finally, make sure you're ending strongly and definitively. Plan out what you're going to say, memorize it, deliver it strong and with consistent eye contact. Again, on page 376 of your book, there starts several different speeches. Go in and just like you looked at those speeches for transitions and for main ideas and things like that, go in and specifically look at how did they hook the audience? What do their credibility statements look like? How did they conclude? What was the final strong moment that they used? Okay. All right. This should give you a good idea about attacking the outline for your demonstration speech. If you've already done the outline, then please go back and review and edit it and, make it better based on some of the information that we've talked about here today. All right, guys, have a good night.